Okay, is the tape started?
One moment.
Okay, I will call the July 5th, 2022 regular meeting of the Mill Creek City Council to order. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance and I'll lead it.
Of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Mayor Holtzclaw,
Here.
Mayor Potem Vanel,
Here.
Councilmember Cavallari,
Here.
Councilmember Steckler,
Here.
Councilmember Allison,
Here.
and Councilmember Duque.
Here.
Okay, this brings us to audience communication, and I see Will's hands up already. So name and address, and we'll have a clock up on the screen. So if you get to 3 minutes, please wrap up your comments. So Will, go ahead.
Yeah, Will Nelson, 14925 29th Drive Southeast. I see you're getting a presentation tonight on the comprehensive plan update. And included in that is consideration of the Mill Creek Boulevard sub-area study. Basically, what you guys decide to do with the zoning is going to be the major factor in what happens to that project and whatever happens along Mill Creek Boulevard. So I would hope you'd be give that a lot of serious consideration as to what you're going to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Anyone else like to address the council? My side, I don't have there we go. Anyone else? Okay, going, there will be another opportunity at the end of the meeting. That brings us to our presentation tonight and our tutorial on GMA and comprehensive planning. Director Todd, or
Yeah, thank you. I'll kick it off. So thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, Council, City Manager, letting us talk to you tonight about comprehensive plan. We're fortunate to have Clay White has been our acting planning manager, but Clay comes with a lot of experience, both from having been a planning and development services manager at Snohomish County for many years and worked with other cities like ours in a temporary kind of fill-in spot. And he's also been working quite a bit with the state in his private capacity on GMA. So he's kind of an expert. So we're lucky to have him here for one purpose, but also able to help us with the other. You may remember several years ago now, Vision 2050 was what we talked about back in 2017, 2018, when that was first getting started. That has advanced to adoption in 2020. We had our chance at that first plan way back when we were involved at that point, but now it's gone to the point where they've adopted that at the Puget Sound Regional Council level. The multi-county planning policies have happened as a result of that. The county's been working on countywide planning policies, and we're getting to the stage where now we will work our comp plan lined up with those things. And Clay will talk about that some more tonight, about how it all fits together. Some fundamentals from 2050, Vision 2050. It's focusing the growth on the larger cities, the regional growth centers, and the areas that are served by high capacity transit. And so we are, as Mill Creek, are one of those areas served by high capacity transit. It retains that same growth allocation strategy that was used in the prior plan called Vision 2040, whereby they assign the regional geography and they assign the growth by regional geography and characteristics, not by jurisdiction. So whether it's in a city or in a county, it really depends on the geography and the characteristics of that. Clay will talk about that as well. And then finally, the whole plan is based on a development pattern that supports urban design and connectivity and preserves rural and resource lands. Vision 2050, the overall regional plan talks about the economy, housing, transportation, public services, environment. This version of 2050 will be asked to look at other things like equity, climate change, affordable housing, or new topics that will be added. So that's something our staff will be working on, updating our plan, if nothing else. Remember that our plan needs to fit with the Vision 2050 strategy. We have to have our plan certified by PSRC. If you don't, you are not eligible for the funding that comes through PSRC. And for our region, that means about $260 million a year in federal funds from various transportation programs. It also makes sure that we get support for any projects we would have on the regional transportation improvement plan. Even as using our own money, there's a regional transportation plan that's part of the whole planning process. So the things that our citizens would use to get around within the city if you use federal funds, but also projects that might be affecting how our citizens get to work get to school, get to recreation, do those kinds of things. Like, for instance, a project to improve the interchange at 164th and I-5. Something would be of concern to our citizens. Might not be a city project. It's very important that that gets funded, and our plan plays a part in that. Our plan is due at the end of 2024, so we're just getting this kicked off. You may see other cities just starting to kick it off. It's a time of lots of community engagement. We really wanted to start off tonight with kind of the fundamentals. So Clay is going to put the Vision 2050 plan within the entire scope of how GMA mandates how we do our planning in the state of Washington. This is the same presentation basically that he's given to our planning commission just a couple of weeks ago. And you'll see elements of this throughout, but we want to mostly give you lots of education, lots of chance for questions so that you and the community all understand how planning works around here. So with that, Clay, take it away. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. That was a fine introduction. You got things set up perfectly. For the record, Clay White, interim planning manager for the city. It's grateful for the opportunity to be here today and talk a little bit about some upcoming planning that you're working on. So just a little bit about our upcoming 2024-2044 comprehensive plan update. We'll be looking out 20 additional years and you'll be able to help shape how the community is going to grow. So a lot of big decisions. Let's see here. Slide change. Perfect. So just a few goals today. And I think one thing to keep in context is that as we, you're going to have lots of presentations on very specific issues, housing policies or land use changes. Tonight, we're really trying to frame up the bigger picture for you. And planning is really complicated. It's okay if like some of this, as I'm going through it, it's like you're not connecting the dots, because that's why you have early conversations with a council, is so you can go through it at a high level and then you can start drilling down. So my goal is to set up the next director for success and to engage these first conversations. And then when you hear it again in the fall and as you start next year, it won't be the first time. So I think the biggest thing to remember is that, you know, we think a lot about our development regulations or zoning regulations or, you know, taking things through design review, but they all have a place that they started. So, I mean, there's a huge connection between our state laws, primarily a Growth Management Act, but there's a lot of other statutes that we deal with, regional planning, countywide planning policies in your comprehensive plan. They're all connected and have to be consistent with each other. So we'll give you an overview of just how everything's connected, maybe briefed on a few of the key topics and issues that you may be dealing with as part of the update. And then I'm here to answer any questions that you have. And just ask questions along the way. This is just a conversation. So let's start with the Growth Management Act. So our Growth Management Act was enacted in 1990, and it provides that framework for planning at the for state and regional and countywide and local planning for growth. So there's a lot of angst over sprawl, environmental protections, and a number of other issues. So the GMA kind of wraps, gives you an opportunity to be planning together for growth that's going to occur and a whole bunch of other issues. So it requires our fastest growing cities and counties to develop a comprehensive plan to manage their growth. So the requirements for Mill Creek are not the same as they may be in Columbia County, for instance. So there's certain requirements that we're doing here that you would have to do if you're slower growing. The update, so you're updating your plan every 10 years, looking out 20 years. State law changes all the time. So it's 10 years now. There was a bill last session that changed it from every 8 to 10 years. And you will also talk about a little bit tonight. There was a bill that last session that it gave you an extra 6 months to get your plan completed as well. And one thing that's always I think it's a big conversation piece is that GMA is modeled as a bottoms up planning process. So you think about it, that there's state law that provides like a framework. It gives those guideposts of that you're planning for housing and land use and transportation and capital facilities. But it really is in the context of you being able to make local decisions and balance those things. So, I mean, you also have mixed in regional planning requirements. So, you know, you can preserve your community character, but you also have planning requirements that you're required to meet. Where that line is, you know, it's really about, you know, how you work together to try to, you know, achieve those state goals at the same time, balancing with what's best for the citizens of the city. So go through some of the requirements tonight and we can talk about that as well. There's 14 goals within the Growth Management Act. It goes through everything from affordable housing, environmental protections, property rights, processing permits. Goals don't mean anything unless they're implemented. So your goals are implemented through a number of different statutes, and several of them are implemented through what are called GMA elements. So they're different kind of planning elements that you have to have. So you have land use where you're planning for population and employment. So there's requirements, things you have to do as part of your comprehensive plan. Housing, there was a big bill last year that passed that modified housing requirements for the housing planning you have to do. It's getting much more granular. So you're not only having to show that you're accommodating your growth target, but you're also having to show that you're providing for a variety of housing types at all income levels. It's pretty specific. There's guidance that's coming out from the state later this year to help guide how you'll go through that process. But you're not only planning for people, but it's also to make sure that you're hitting kind of the housing targets as well.
Clay?
Yes.
So on that, one of the big questions people have with communities like ours is requirements for affordable housing. Is there a number or a ballpark benchmark you're supposed to hit? You're supposed to have X amount of % for affordable housing in a community per 1,000 or per 10,000?
There, I think under the new bill, the guidance coming out from Commerce is going to provide some guidelines by jurisdiction for some targets. So you're going to have to weigh against what you have versus maybe what's required. There isn't anything at the state level or regional that gives you like a fair share. Like here's what gets us to 100%. And if you take 1% of this and 5% of this, if we all did our piece as a county and the cities, we'd equal 100%. It's not, but it's getting to that point. And that's pretty hard to do. So later this year, you're going to get some more specificity on that point. So that's one of the big bills that passed this last session.
Clay, when you were talking about different types of housing, what are examples of different types of housing?
Single family, multifamily, middle housing, duplexes, triplexes. It could be looking at anti-displacement policies. So as you're redeveloping, what's happening to people that are living in those homes. It lists in the Growth Management Act under the housing element, it lists very specifically now the types of housing you're required to apply for. It did before at some level, but it's much more specific now. So I can get you that information.
Does it list condos on there? I'm just curious.
I don't think it specifically lists condominiums, although
Okay.
that's a housing type that we need. And there's other barriers to condominiums being built, but we certainly need them so that people can actually purchase homes, not just rent.
Okay.
So you're planning for utilities and capital facilities, making sure you have water and sewer and all the utilities you need for the growth that's projected. It's all got to work together. Transportation, environmental features, parks and open space, and so on. So your update requirements, you're really looking at policies and regulations that are consistent with new and revised countywide planning policies. We'll talk about that tonight. Case law. So if there's something that changed in a big court case, you're going to implement that as part of the update. Statutory changes. So any laws that have changed since your last update, you need to be consistent there. And best available science for your critical areas regulations. And what's nice is you've just completed your critical areas regulations. So in essence, you've already started your comprehensive plan update. You've taken I mean, that's a pretty significant piece for a lot of communities. So you can call that like an early action so that you won't have to update the critical areas regulations again.
Clay, I have a question
Yes.
real quick. It makes sense that they require us to update some of our infrastructure, the water, whatever, to before the growth, but do they actually provide any help with funding, any mechanisms for helping fund growth in our infrastructure in order to accommodate the growth that they're asking from us?
Well, I mean, there's some of we'll talk a little bit, there's funding for planning. There is, a variety of programs to get money for infrastructure projects. I think sometimes what you're required to do under the Growth Management Act is have a 6-year plan that's financed and funded. And then you have a 20-year plan, which is, you're looking out there, you don't know exactly where that funding is going to come from. So there's a variety of funding sources and it probably depends, what's going on at the time, whether there's federal dollars.
Okay.
Now, some of that comes through PSRC. Some of it comes from the state or federal agencies. So it probably depends on what you're looking for. So sometimes, yes,
Thank you.
it's complicated, not easy. And then, of course, on top of policies and regulations, you're looking at population and employment growth. So just a little bit about your update. So just showing how everything works together. And so your update is due December 31st, 2024. I'm kind of showing that we're in the middle of 2022 and we're starting that process. You have done critical areas, great job. We're starting these conversations now, but there's so much work that goes that precedes you starting this process. And that's why it's important that you're at those tables of when state law changes are made, it impacts the planning you have to do. When regional policies are completed, you have a requirement to be consistent with those policies. Countywide planning policies are consistent with the regional policies. Your comp plan is consistent with those countywide planning policies. So, you're not locked in at this point, but certainly there's a lot of conversations that have been having for years. So, a lot of that has been set out. So it's kind of important to recognize that, the planning process for your update may start now, but it's been going on probably since just after you completed your last one. So Puget Sound Regional Council, Regional Transportation and Planning Organization, focuses on the 4 county regions. So there's additional requirements for planning for these 4 counties. As Mike mentioned, there's transportation funding. That's a huge piece. They do a regional transportation plan and economic development strategy. And then of course, it all ties into planning. So really the main focus is the link between planning and transportation issues. They also have a lot of great data. They do have a whole bunch of different features or things that they do down there. What we're focusing on here is Vision 2050. So it's multi-county planning policies and the regional growth strategy. Those are 2 important pieces. The multi-county planning policies and the regional growth strategy implemented through the countywide planning policies. So if you've talked about Snohomish County tomorrow, so when Vision is adopted, it sets this framework. And then as the county looks at that with its cities, it's looking at how do we have our policies and vision consistent with that regional vision so that, things don't stop at the King County line. How are we coordinating on a whole bunch of issues? You're not required to have a policy for every policy. You have local choices. However, there's this consistency issue and you'll be looking at the same thing. So in terms of growth, it's focused on growth. Vision is looking out to 2050. Your plan's looking out to 2044. So it's adjusted a little bit. But by 2050, between 2017 and 2050, you're looking at adding 1.6 million new people within the 4 county region and 1.2 million new jobs. You think about, there's been a choice at the state level that most of the growth is going to happen within existing urban areas. So we're not moving into rural areas or agricultural areas or forest areas. So you can think about the challenges that presents to communities like this. New focus areas for policies are things like climate change, equity, displacement, housing. So there's a variety of new areas where there's new policies or new chapters. You'll have to weed through that. We're already looking at that. So Sybil's kind of doing a housing policy gap analysis so we can look at, what are the new policies? What do our current policies say? What is the gap? Then what do we do about it? And then we can come to council for direction on that. And then, Vision 2050 is updated through the CPPs. So as Director Todd mentioned, the growth is allocated under Vision, population and employment into what's called regional geographies. So, you have metropolitan cities in Snohomish County, that's Everett, core cities, that's Bothell and Linwood, and then you have high capacity transit communities. And as you can see, there's a lot of growth, 50% of the growth that's allocated to those areas. Mill Creek is in that, high capacity transit communities. When the CPPs were done, well, so just to, within that group, you have Arlington, you have the Bothell unincorporated urban growth area, Edmonds, the Everett unincorporated urban growth area, the Linwood unincorporated urban growth area, Marysville, Mill Creek, Mount Lake Terrace, Mukilteo. And so you have a lot of communities that are jointly having to plan for 50% of that growth between now and 2044. And it's allocated a little differently for every county, recognizing that they're trying to get growth around where there's transportation systems or plan. Same with employment, same communities, but it's 30% for high capacity transit communities. So again, through the countywide planning policy process, the cities got together in high capacity transit communities, said, hey, how can we divvy this up, at least at a preliminary level, so you could go do your comprehensive plan where you end up. Hopefully it's in this ballpark, but you still have your legislative authority to make decisions for sure. So just one slide on countywide planning policies. So countywide planning policies are a function of the Growth Management Act, and it just ensures that you coordinate on certain issues. So if Mill Creek and Bothell and Linwood and the county were planning, but you weren't talking to each other at some level, how would you know that you're planning for the right transportation systems or housing? So it's shared policies on certain things that then you can incorporate into your local comprehensive plan. So just a little bit on your comprehensive plan and as you're looking to implement the countywide plan. Again, this is your timeline. We've got a couple of years, which is good. Your general kind of overview is that you have two requirements to meet. It's the Growth Management Act requirements that we talked about, and then Puget Sound Regional Council requirements as well. Your GMA is fulfilled by best available science, case law, state law changes, implementing policies. So that's how you're kind of meeting that test there. With PSRC, you have a kind of a consistency test. So as Director Todd mentioned, PSRC will certify your comprehensive plan. You send it to them once it's completed, and they're looking that your plan implements kind of that vision at the regional level. So where that line is not exactly clear all the time, but I mean, I think, one thing I just would suggest is just have staff be coordinating with PSRC along the way. I mean, you could be talking to them, especially if you're doing things that maybe are a little bit different. Encourage that communication. So it is two paths that you're trying to hit both of them. They both have different meanings. Different things happen if you're not implementing them correctly. So you'll be walking through both. And then, of course, community engagement is a strong tenet of the Growth Management Act. And so you'll be thinking about as you're budgeting for next year and kind of coming up with your work plan of just, how do you want to engage the community as you're going through this process? People usually come when you're making permit decisions, but they're not as strong when you're making the policy decisions so it's like, how can you, have people provide that meaningful input into that vision? Because once you put it in policy and your regulations, you're just implementing it. So being clever about that will be. There is some money from Commerce for your update. There's a concerted effort, actually a project we're working on right now for the state. One of the things in kind of working with Commerce is consistent and kind of long-term funding for planning. So this amount won't cover probably your entire update depending on the scope, but at least it helps, and there hasn't been money in the past. So this grant should be coming this year. State budget works a little bit differently, but you should have this over the next little bit between July 1st of this year and June 30th of next year, half, and then half for the following year. They work on a June to June budget. New state laws, House Bill 1220, that's the housing bill that changed the housing element. And then there's House Bill 1717, which is regarding tribal participation in the Growth Management Act. So there's new requirements for outreach and working with tribes if they're interested in participating as part of your plan update. There's several other smaller bills. And there are several bills that did not pass that were right on the edge of passing this year, such as changes that would have required additional planning for climate. So House Bill 1099. So that's actually a substantial piece that did not pass. You're still working on climate change issues because there's policies at the regional level, but that would have been a significant piece of work that you would have been doing.
So Clay, what would climate change policies look like in Mill Creek? It's not like we're preparing for the 30-year flood.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, I think that if it had passed, there would have been guidance put out from the state. I don't think that it can be things like internal things you're already doing at the city to use electric vehicles. It could be things that would impact building codes. It could be material use for projects. There's a lot of different things that you could think about that may be best practices. But I think that's important is when you pass legislation, how does that translate into development regulations or into new plans or fees or things that would, and I don't know personally in reading the legislation, and this happens a lot, how it would be implemented was not as clear as what you're trying to accomplish. And so I think that it would have come through that, but they didn't end up passing.
So I don't want to get hung up on that term. So it's more of an environmentally friendly way of building and operations within your city. Is that kind of?
those could be some of the methods. I mean, I think you'd have some local choice of like how you would implement requirements. You're gonna be having this discussion anyway, because there's the regional policies from PSRC. There's a ton of ways I think you can make choices that will could benefit the environment in the same way, do it in a way that, you know, fits where the city's at. So, but if this bill passes in the future, I would guess there would be state guidance that would give you like the menu of options or things that you could be doing.
One second, Mike. Those bills did not pass this year, but I would say there's a very good chance that one or both of them would pass next year. The one that we need to be paying attention to is the bill that would add a salmon recovery goal to the planning goals. It's important for us because we talked last meeting about functions and values of critical areas. It's been pretty well established for several decades that new development can't cause a net decrease in functions and values, but you can't require an increase. You can't require a developer to improve the environmental condition. This bill that would have added the salmon recovery element would have changed that. It started out very broadly requiring net ecological benefit, and that got scaled back after much opposition, primarily from the private development community. But now the bill where it ended up coming this close to getting passed would have placed that onus basically on cities and counties. So we would have borne the burden of, through our infrastructure projects, making sure that there is a net ecological gain, at least on a watershed level. So not on an individual project basis, but on the WIRA level, watershed level. So that one is one that could impact us. They made it, they were very close to getting passed, and the legislative sausage making process killed them. But they will likely be back.
Yeah, I think that one's coming back, and there'll be a lot of bills like there is every session on GMA and on a variety of topics.
And I think they will be back because the legislature knows that next year is their opportunity to adopt changes that we all have to incorporate into our 2024 plan updates.
Yes.
So Director Todd had a comment.
Yes, I'm looking at there was kind of a summary sheet of what changed in Vision 2050 from Vision 2040. And so with respect to climate change, so what they were talking about was state law. Remember, within the Puget Sound Regional Council area, we've got stricter things going on. And so it says here, seeks to advance the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency's targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Includes a new action directing a greenhouse gas strategy that builds off of PSRC's existing 4-part greenhouse gas strategy. Seeks local plans to include policies and actions to address climate change. Those aren't mandatory, but those are things they're going to be looking for in our plan. So we're kind of a little bit ahead of where state law is. But the mayor is exactly right. This is where we need to be paying attention to the consequences of some of the things that are fun to talk about in King County, but don't always make sense. You hear them talking about we're going to eliminate natural gas stoves or natural gas heat. Those things will ripple through into our policies eventually. Probably not in this plan, but that's where we kind of need to pay attention to what's going on in the state legislature and make sure our legislators understand the consequences.
And before we get too far afield from some of the earlier comments, John, you'd want to look at the section 3670A030 of the GMA, which is the definition section, as well as subsection 0702, which talks about the housing element. So they don't talk about condominiums, but 030 might be the goal, but it talks about having to plan for housing based on low income housing, moderate income housing, extremely low income housing. So that's the way it addresses it. And ultimately our obligation is to, among other things, adopt a housing element, ensuring the vitality and character of established residential neighborhoods. That includes an inventory and analysis of existing and projected housing needs that identifies the number of housing units necessary to manage projected growth as provided by the Department of Commerce, including, something popped up, units for moderate, low, very low, and extremely low income households. So that's how it addresses the levels, not by the type of housing, but by the income level.
Do they address the type of housing elsewhere?
It does in
Elsewhere?
that section. It does above there. It does talk about housing types, but then you also go to income bands
Yeah, but they talks about considering duplexes and triplexes and stuff like that, but not the form of ownership like condominium that I'm aware of.
So the commerce guidance, I think, is gonna try to allocate by jurisdiction. What kind of housing you have and what you are required to plan for as part of your update, or at least be looking at. So there hasn't been a round of trying to implement this. This will be the first, kind of take at it. But yeah, it's gonna, how it actually happens is gonna, there's a lot of jurisdictions that are asking the same thing. This is gonna be a pretty difficult challenge, because you can imagine that the income levels that we're missing for housing in the region.
Since we stopped on this one, I was going to ask, I would like to get a copy of the different types of housing.
Mhm.
You mentioned that, and I think obviously the other council members would like it as well.
I'll forward that tomorrow.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Okay, so yeah, we've talked about Vision 2050. You've got some important topics. Your growth targets are going to be important. So, you've got basically the way that it's set out in the countywide planning policies is that target that's in there is what you're required to at least consider as one of the alternatives as you do your comprehensive plan update. So it's if you don't adopt the target that has been assigned, then you have to go through a process called reconciliation at the Snohomish County tomorrow level, where you have to say, if you took less, then who's taking more, and try to figure out how you get to 100%. You hope that doesn't happen, because it just creates a longer process, but you still are not required to adopt that target. If you don't, I would just, you need to be looking at how you're still meeting that Vision 2050 consistency test and other requirements under growth management. So it's a tough walk, but there are options that you obviously have.
Councilmember Duque had a question.
Yes.
My question is, I'm curious to understand our surrounding areas, what their numbers look like as we're talking about it. Because you mentioned, and I just had a note, and I didn't want it to slip by me, about unincorporated Bothell, or just all of our neighbors, because
Sure.
I think that's a lot of tends to be a lot of concern or conversations about what's happening in areas that we don't kind of have control over. So maybe looking at what their requirements are. And who makes those? I'm assuming it's county council that makes decisions for the unincorporated areas. So they're probably going through the same thing as a county council, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I can send you the tables as well, where those targets are adopted in the countywide planning policies for both employment and population. So you can kind of see where the assignments are for all the surrounding areas in your unincorporated urban areas. Absolutely. So this is just pulling out the Mill Creek portion. So your initial population target versus kind of the county total, you're looking at planning for about 1%, a little over 1% of the total growth that's being planned for. Your 2019 population versus 2044, you've got about a little less than 4,000 people that you would be planning for.
Clay, is that 1% of what's allocated to the county, not the bigger 1.8 number for the region?
Correct. It's 1.3% of the county total,
Right.
not the 4 county total. Yeah, you'd be at 0.02%. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that when you're doing your planning, you're really looking at needing to accommodate, you have a certain amount of capacity that you already have. So right now you have about, in the buildable lands report that was issued a couple of years ago, you had capacity for about 1,520 people. So you can kind of deduct that from the 3,887 because so that, and the 2,367 would be the additional capacity that you'd be looking at creating. Does that make sense? So you already have some capacity to accommodate growth. You just have to create the difference. Now, where the housing element requirement comes in, where you say planning for people is not enough, you also have to show how you're providing it for all these different income bands or housing types. I don't know how that works out yet. We'll wait until we get the commerce guidance, but it is getting more complicated on that topic.
Councilmember Cavalieri has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. So you just touched on it. That's kind of the pink elephant in the room. If we as a city only have X amount of buildable land and it conflicts with how much housing you're supposed to have, what's the hammer on the city? I mean, what can the city be held to account for? I mean, how do we, I know this kind of getting the cart before the horse, but that's kind of the the balance that we're looking for here is that there's not a lot of buildable land here. There's small amounts and and I don't think that's a lot of growth. I think it's what 3,800 difference that you had there, but within 20 years, it's probably doable to some degree, but what happens if we don't? I guess that's the question.
If you decided you weren't going to plan for your growth target, I mean, you'd have possible consequences at the state level. If your comprehensive plan was appealed, you go to the growth management hearings board, and it could escalate all the way up to sanctions from the governor where you lose your gas tax. At BSRC, it's the consistency issue. So if they didn't certify your comprehensive plan, then you wouldn't be eligible for federal transportation dollars that would be funneled through Puget Sound Regional Council. So I do think that the piece that has not been worked out is if PSRC is saying you have to plan, you're allocated a certain amount of growth, but the state's telling you you have to plan for all of these housing types. If you can't accommodate those housing types within your target, I don't know. I think there's some conversations between the state and the regional level of like,
Right.
you need to provide us more guidance here because, you may not be able to do the housing piece. You may have to provide more capacity, which may upset PSRC depending on what city you are. So, I mean, I think there's some things that have to be reconciled and it's going to happen as updates are occurring.
And that's where I was going. So that's what the reconciliation process will be for then, is to have those dialogues or conversations later on.
That conversation I would have throughout your comprehensive plan update with folks at the state and the regional level and with your, planning staff. Reconciliation would be if you did not adopt the growth target. You adopted something different. So that would be that process that would go through.
Councilmember Allison has a question.
So the guidance that we're expecting from the Commerce Department, is there any kind of commitment from that body to provide that guidance, or are we just held until we receive that?
They're developing it right now. So,
Okay, so they're committed to getting it to us by the end of the year, or?
yeah, I think it's this fall that will be coming out. So,
Okay,
and
okay,
Commerce is a good group. A bill passes and it says, here's a new law and you have to have guidance done in 6 months, and then they have to go and get this
Okay.
guidance done. So
okay.
they're actively working on it right now. They've got a consultant that's assisting them. But it's complicated.
Right. And then with that guidance, then we would have something tangible to go have a conversation with PSRC.
Yeah, I think those are good questions for PSRC when that comes out, is how do you reconcile if there's a difference? I mean, I think that's a good question for all planners and folks on the councils to be asking what happens when certain things occur. So yes, and to be, I think there'll probably be some opportunities to comment on the guidance, and if it may not, it's hard to get something that you're going to apply to every community. Just like a capacity issues in some communities versus.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I'm struggling to get my head around if we only have so much space left to build. They're going to require us to do housing in a broad range of income levels. How on earth do you even fit that all into the same little bit of space? So I think I'm struggling to get my head around how this is possible for a city like Mill Creek. So I think that's where I'm at the moment, because I just don't see how we go and put a broad range of income levels and types of housing on what little bit of space we have. So
Super challenge. I mean,
yeah, I think I'm struggling to get my head around how that would even work. So yeah.
well, there's a difference. So the way I would look at it is there's a planning level analysis and then there's an economic analysis. So at a planning level, it would say things like be rezoning, single family neighborhoods to allow mixed housing types, allowing for redevelopment at higher densities. So you're getting to where undeveloped land is, there's really very little undeveloped land left. So what you're doing is redevelop. So providing opportunities for that land to be able to redevelop. Now, economically, in some areas that works really well because your land values are such that it's just naturally going to occur. And if you do the right planning, you get the right mix. It's harder in areas like Mill Creek where you could probably, take a single family lot and say you could have 5 units on it, but it won't redevelop because the value to do that would not be there. So I think, but at the planning level, that's what you're looking at, is you're looking at making tough choices. But you think about it at a regional level, if you're going to fit 1.6 million people more by 2050 in the same geography, the same area, then that's a lot of tough choices that communities have to make. And the things that you're thinking about are the same things that Linwood or Edmonds or any other community is having to think. That there is no just, we'll put it over there. So yeah, these are super tough challenges.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, the GMA is not well written. The housing goal says, plan for and accommodate housing affordable to all economic segments of the population of the state, promote a variety of residential densities and housing types, and encourage preservation of existing housing stock. So if we're running out of developable land, and so the other point I would need to make is in response to your comment, Councilmember Duque, and we have to remember GMA is a planning exercise. This doesn't mean this is where it's going to happen. I mean, to the unincorporated Snohomish County urban area, the current planning has been ratcheting down how much growth they want to occur in that area. They want it to occur in cities. We're developing in the unincorporated urban area because that's where the land is. That's why the growth has been going on there. That's where the developable land, for the most part, exists, although it's continues to dwindle. So the UGA boundaries are largely set. They fight like heck to keep those from expanding. We've got all these different types of housing we're supposed to plan for. Oh, and by the way, we're supposed to preserve the existing housing stock. So talk about dancing on the head of a pin.
It's all to be balanced, right? I mean, then the important thing is to create a really good record of the decisions that you're making and why you're making them, and walk through those exercises as you're doing this. But I think that you should have the discretion, if you create a good record, to be able to say, here's why we're making the decisions we are, because those things have to be balanced because you can't do all of them. So that'll be that tightrope that you have to walk. Same thing with employment. I mean, you're pretty much there on employment. So I think you can create more capacity, which may happen if you're looking at the sub area, but you're not required to create a lot more employment.
Clay, Melissa had another question.
Yes.
Councilmember Duque, we can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Do you anticipate that those unincorporated areas will then have to become cities at some point within this growth plan? or is
That's a
that-
whole nother topic. So
Gotcha.
and Snohomish County is unique because we have larger unincorporated urban areas than I think pretty much any county in the Puget Sound region. And so I don't know if Clay was planning to get in this. We have municipal urban growth areas that are unincorporated, that some are assigned to cities. Some cities compete over both of them and claim both of them. In other areas, the cities say, we don't want, neither of us want it. So we have a little bit of a sordid history with that, going back a couple decades, where the city of Linwood tried to annex out by I-5 where Walmart is. And
Yes.
the city of Mill Creek fought it, not because we wanted it. I think it's because we didn't want Linwood to get it. But
Right. You're just curious about what this whole process, I mean, besides what this will look like, but also how the makeup of, having more, having cities, because then from the residents that I've spoken to, just in general, that are in unincorporated areas, they don't feel represented. And so when they see what this looks like, what the plans look like, as this comes to happen, as this work is happening, I anticipate maybe they'll want to be more represented in that way.
Well, that's what the
I don't
Growth Management Act is.
Yeah.
And one of the goals is really that you have unincorporated urban areas, but really that goal is that they be annexed within that 20-year planning period. So
Oh.
really, except for like Maltby, which would be like, it's not attached to a city. Or,
Mhm.
The areas that are surrounding Mill Creek, the thought process is those would be annexed into the city of Mill Creek. And you can't use an annex, just making
Right,
sure you
I saw
can't
that
use an
note.
annexation for your population target. So I just wanted to make sure to put that in there. But yeah, so that's kind of the thought process, is that there would not be over time and then unincorporated urban growth area that would all be.
Councilmember Stecker.
It was mentioned a couple of weeks ago, we were going to be having a discussion about this plan. Is that coming down the road or? Because I remember I'd asked the question about annexation and the answer was, we're going to be having a discussion about annexation, how it relates to the comp plan. And is that forthcoming still or?
I mean, I'm happy to do a presentation for you.
Oh, I was just kind of asking the question. I thought there was one coming.
That's basically the footnote there. So if you annex, remember the growth targets are based on regional characteristics, independent of what jurisdiction it is. So if it's in the county between us and I-5, unincorporated area, or whether it's in the city of Mill Creek, doesn't matter. The numbers have already been assigned by buildable lands report and capacity. So annexing doesn't instantly say, oh, we handle this by annexing a new area. That's our 3,000 people. Those people are already counted.
Yeah.
Part of the unincorporated county's planning. That's the point.
Let me take a crack at trying to answer that. Clay, you hit on a great point. Is I would encourage us not to look in blinders of housing. We've talked for years on how we spur economic development in the city to get tax revenues coming in since we are largely built out. That's where the sub area or annexation could come into play to meet some of our requirements under the GMA, but possibly promote economic development. So those are things I think we need to look at. If not, I don't know how much annexation will be part of this comp plan update, but it's something I think we need to look at, our annexation policies and what a strategy would be.
On a state project working on now, looking at bringing back some, incentives, some taxation incentives for annexations that expired a few years ago.
More than a
and
few years ago.
broadening those a bit.
Yeah.
So, hopefully, hopefully there's going to be some incentives in the future that would help cities with this, help with the annexation issue. So we can bring back the topic, but I think the biggest thing is if you annexed an area, you would just be adding how much growth you have to plan for it because you'd be taking that piece plus what you're assigned for the city of Mill Creek currently.
Yeah, and the challenge with annexation, I think we had these discussions before you joined the council. We looked at the area south to get down to the casino on 180th.
Mm-hmm.
And we also looked up in the northwest corner. And as I recall, in the northwest corner, we were finding there wasn't as much developable area as we thought there might be. The challenge with going south or going west is we can't cherry pick. We can't draw a narrow line to get to a large area that we want to get to. The Boundary Review Board will toss us on our keisters and throw it out. And so that's where you got to get strategic, looking out west with the Orange Line and light rail coming. What do we want our city to be 10, 20 years down the road? And how do we want to grow? Or do we want to grow? Maybe the answer is we don't. But that's why I think we need to look at these issues together, not look with blinders at housing. We don't want to plan for this much. I think we need to be looking, could we plan for it and achieve some of our other goals and objectives?
I think it would be a good idea to have the discussion just for, if anything, to help clarify in everyone's mind, the issues regarding annexation. I mean, questions that come to my mind right now is what is the number that's given to a piece of open land right now? Is it single family? Is it multifamily? If it's single family, can we annex and develop it for multifamily and maximize it? There's an economic factor of annexation, as the mayor said, that depending on the type of land that we develop, or annex, if there's residential, if there's commercial, I mean, there's different factors on annexation that we may need to consider. I mean, there's a number of issues about it, but I think just not talking about it and not looking at it, I'd like to maybe open it up as a discussion item so we could have some open discussion about it. That's what I was hoping we were going to do.
Yeah, at some point, I think we will. Maybe it starts with having a presentation in the fall on the annexation policies, which we've adopted before I got on the council. Probably I don't think we updated them recently, have we, Dr. Dodd?
No, I'm thinking that maybe the general presentation, I guess the trick is the history is some of us have been through this dance several times. And I think the attitudes count, the council's attitude and the community's attitude was those annexations never really paid off. We were annexing older infrastructure that didn't look like Mill Creek. And so where we have annexed older infrastructure, it's been painful for us.
Yeah, and that when we were looking at that area south, that was right at the time where we were discovering the issues with the stormwater system up in Heatherwood West. And that kind of scared us and caused some pause because we didn't want to invest a bunch of money to find out we're looking at an area that just had more ticking time bombs with pipes under the ground.
And you may very well be correct with all that information, but over half the council has not been privy to that data or any of that information. So
Do it.
it might be good to bring the council up to the same level that some of the rest of you are at.
Yeah.
And so we could,
Do that.
you know,
We can pull
Make
some of
those
that forward,
decisions.
the pros and cons, we've looked at these in the past. I think we should make it clear, unless you really want to. There's no specific annexations we're looking at. There was some
Correct.
by the press of what the annexations you're talking about. I think talking in general about the annexation policies as part of our comp plan update makes a lot of sense. We should
Yeah.
have some
that's all I
discussion
wanted to
and-
do. That's all I wanted to do.
stuff. Yeah.
Mayor Pro Tem followed by Councilmember Duque.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. For some reason, my light didn't go off for a little while. I was just gonna say and add that it was my remembrance that Councilmember Steckler had asked last time, could we look at it? And we said that yes, we would see about looking into looking at discussing annexation in the future. And that's kind of how we left it. And I agree. I think that it would be good for us, especially since the majority of the council is new since last time that you all discussed this, that as we're doing the comp plan, we should at least, like you said, look over the policies and see what it all entails so that we understand, because I think in order to make good decisions, we need to at least understand what that would look like and what it would mean for any annexation. So I agree with him that it would be good for us to get updated on all of that and make decisions on whether or not to look at it or not from that information.
I'll coordinate with Director Dodd and sure.
So my last question that I had earlier was, do we have a snapshot of what the city's housing currently looks like? Like the percentage of this housing and, you know, or, you know, do we
I-
have something?
I don't think
visual
anything
to look
recent.
at?
There will be, as part of the comprehensive plan update, you'll do a housing needs analysis.
Mhm.
So you'll be looking at that, but I don't know if there's anything that's recent. There, I mean, there could be some information in buildable lands, but I don't know if it's
Okay.
that
I-
housing mix.
I would find it
demands.
useful.
I think the only numbers I remember is the 53-47 split, 53% single family and 47% multifamily. I don't know if we have it in inventory in our comp plan broken down any more than that.
For me, it would be helpful to see more of a breakdown than that. And I also think that would be helpful in terms of our communication when we talk about, you know, when we're just sharing what we're doing, is saying, giving that snapshot of what is current. Because I think that's helpful for people who aren't familiar with this process.
Well, if we don't have it now, it's one of the requirements under the new housing policy that they will be bringing it to us.
And it's a good, I mean, housing needs analysis really just housing data, and housing data, you know, it'll tell you, where are we? And then, you know, like, then you compare that with where we need to go and helps you make informed decisions. So that will be part of the comprehensive plan.
Sorry, we're just throwing you off. Councilmember Allison has another question.
No, that's great. This is what we're here for. Okay.
I'm sorry, we cannot hear.
Whoops, sorry. Is there, in this requirement, you know, to increase the employment, is there guidance around what kind of jobs those are, or is it literally just any job?
Yeah, I don't think that I know the statute doesn't break it down by employment type.
Okay.
So, and I don't think the state rules do that either. So no, it's just employment.
Okay, thank you.
So, you know, just your general options is this is where the, you know, the sub area plan comes back for your consideration. So if you were looking at, if we're just looking like at the population side, when you're looking at your comprehensive plan update, there's a number of ways to be looking at it. You may be looking at a no action alternative, which means you're not doing anything. You may look at adopting one of the options under the sub area plan or looking at both of them. And then, if you're not commenting your growth there, then are you looking at like a spread option plan where you're looking at other options in the city, which may be much more difficult choices or maybe not. So when you get there, I think we can, be spacing that out and looking at a variety of different ways that would get you from the place you are to the place that you've got, kind of staring at you here. with your target. So I think just the next steps is developing that project schedule and engagement strategy. I would assume that would happen later this year. Obviously, we're at flux with getting a new planning manager. I'm trying to tee anything up that I can get done for sure to help develop that work program and budget. So I would assume you'd be seeing some things in the budget coming this year and just tying those to kind of deliverables that you would see next year. And then just work with council to define and refine the scope of work. So there's, if you're doing like an environmental impact statement, I mean, that's going to be pretty costly. If you're wanting to do really heavy, community engagement, there's a big difference between putting something on your website and doing a lot of community meetings or translating things to different languages or attending events. So I think providing you some range of options of what you might want to see, and then we can budget accordingly for that. That is all that I have for you.
Does anyone have any questions? Councilmember Allison.
I just want to say thank you. This is really helpful being new to this. Having dealt with a career in a very regulated industry, it's nothing new, but different, right? So thank you.
Yes, it's a great presentation. Thank you.
I echo that. Fantastic presentation. I learned a lot today. Thank you.
I look,
Got other questions? You want pointers to things like Vision 2050 or the local course on the short course on local planning, those kinds of things. If you're interested in get deeper, point you towards that. Like I said, it's complicated, but it is beneficial to have some background and some other materials. So let us know if you're looking for something in particular, others will try to meter it out.
Well, if you could point us to the annexation policies that we have adopted, circulating them so people can be thinking about them before we get it on an agenda in the coming months.
and I have some things that I'll be providing to council as well. So
Thanks, Clay.
thank you so much.
And I also think with that name, you should be playing left field for the Dodgers.
I would love to. That sounds great.
Back to ARPA. Finance Director, Ms. Brock.
Don't think they're going to be able to hear me, so I'll come down here. So tonight we're looking at identifying our first project structure with our ARPA funding. With that, so like other cities our size, we're working to best identify our community needs and what strategic investments are going to support our community most. So as a reminder, if we choose a theme tonight, this does not have to be the only theme. We're not going to spend all 5.8 million on this theme. This is just a start. So we can pick other themes later. We can adjust this. I just wanted to make sure everyone understood that. So if we want to move to the next slide. Okay, so we're just going to hit guiding principles again, the different development phases. We're going to look at phase 1 because that's where we're at. Then we're going to review our common council priorities. So when we had our discussions, what did you guys agree on most? And then we are going to look at key points to consider as we move into phase 2. And we're going to discuss the recommendation I make for moving forward with the theme and the one bucket. Okay. Can we go to the next slide? All right, so high level goals, mission, vision. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page so we keep this in mind. Okay. Next slide. All right. So as we are in phase 1 right now, we're just trying to put our guardrails up. So right now we have all like the 4 pages of information everyone reviewed with me, and we're just trying to say, here are some common priorities. Let's tackle some of these community needs. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and confirm the structure that we all agree on. What impacts do we want to make in the community? What projects are aligned? What projects or items best align with our priorities? And then from there, staff's going to go in. We're going to look at the different items. You guys say, hey, this is what we want to make happen. We're going to say, this is how much it's going to cost. This is what it's going to take. And this is how much money overall this theme will be. So we can start moving on to another theme if you want, or we can, stop and plan. And then phase 4 is just likely the resolution and actually cutting the checks for everything. Okay. All right, so right now we discussed last week the different buckets and themes. So this shouldn't be anything new right now. I'm just gonna be recommending one theme and one bucket. You guys can say, hey, we wanna adjust this, we wanna add another bucket. This theme, we think we should throw another bucket under the current theme I'm recommending. And then that's really all the slide is just a reminder. We can go to the next one. Okay, so I just wanted to touch base. 2021 priorities were slightly different because we were dealing with the immediate needs that came from COVID. So we were looking at the different revenue losses. We were looking at, housing instability. People were losing their jobs. So, we were putting money out there. We were doing grants. We were helping our local businesses. We were helping our nonprofits. So we gave the majority of our CARES funding out already to help the majority of those kinds of issues. And so with that, we're going to move on to what our top priorities are now. The next one. So we wanted to give examples of the different buckets just because we didn't feel like we'd had a chance to really dive very deep into what these could look like. So for our economic development, we're talking grants and loans that we had discussed, just different city improvement opportunities for our local businesses. Under community recovery, we're talking utilities, rent, unemployment assistance. Workforce recovery, we're talking the retention pay. How do we keep the current staff we have in place? How do we make sure we don't lose them to other cities? City programs and services. I want to make sure we're not necessarily saying, hey, we want to go and move to City Hall North with passports. At this point in time, enhancing our programs is just getting us back to 2019 levels. And then as we go through, it could mean, hey, maybe we open 2 more windows here, and maybe we bring in way more revenue and we don't have the additional cost in rebuilding City Hall North. So at this point in time, none of these have real structure. Nothing is set in stone. So that's one thing to remember. Again, your different school programs, the daycare and recreation was a big priority for everyone. Okay. All right, so city operations, these are more internal items. So these are things the community doesn't see as much, but are still that foundation. Same thing with the city infrastructure improvement. Your community may not realize how much they're using stormwater until something happens and the street is flooded. And then lastly, a big support was for the community enhancing capital projects. And this was a pretty wide one. So we were trying to make sure we at least touched one of everyone's priorities. So we're talking parks, that could be expanding, cleaning up, refurbishing streets, sidewalks, crosswalks, ranging all the way to DRCC. Do we want some kind of money from ARPA to go to DRCC? Maybe not, but I wanted to make sure we threw that in there just in case. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here are just a few different themes. Again, the first one is pretty large and we will go over that one a little bit more here on the next couple slides. Just touching the others, community safety, some kind of policing, we could tie in crosswalks, different public works, streets, sidewalks, crosswalks, economic prosperity, we're talking business assistance, and then long-term infrastructure planning, we're talking large infrastructure costs.
what do we want ARPA funding to offset? You know, these are probably not going to be items that we can finish by 2024. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. We want to prioritize items that we can have a finished project done for the community by the time ARPA funding has to be spent. Okay. So with that, we tried to summarize the top priorities from council. I would say with city operations, bringing services back to normal with equipment, we're talking the street sweeper, different sidewalk shavers, things that, you know, the community is going to be able to notice immediately. You know, as they're walking down the sidewalk, they're like, hey, these are in really great shape, that kind of thing. Infrastructure is mainly just maintaining and improving our current infrastructure. And then as far as community enhancing capital projects, that's going to be our parks, streets, sidewalks, signage, and crosswalks. For community programs and service development, passports, after school care, recreation, that kind of thing. And then workforce recovery is that retention funding. How do we keep our employees? Okay, next slide. Yes. That would be the community enhancing capital projects. So we'll discuss this in a couple slides, but we've put together a theme. So the community revitalization, preservation, and celebration. We want this large umbrella that all of these ideas can come under, and we can adjust and choose specific items as we move to phase 2. So right now we have, you know, 4 pages of different ideas, and we're saying, let's just bring it in a little. So from there, we want city programs and service development. So we're talking passports, before and after school care, recreation, these kinds of things. If you have other ideas, we can add to that. From there, community enhancing capital projects, streets, sidewalks, crosswalks, streetscapes, water fountains in the parks, these kinds of things. And then last in this piece, we were discussing, as we look at maintaining a clean, safe, and well-maintained city, is it going to be beneficial to have some kind of funding for our businesses that had previously been struggling to have something to keep their storefronts up? Do we want to have some kind of, it doesn't have to be a large amount, but just like 50,000, 100,000, some kind of grant funding that we do as a reimbursement format. So, hey, if you go and you say that you've cleaned the sidewalks in front of your building, if you're cleaning the awnings, you know, sprucing downtown up, you can bring your receipts in and we'll reimburse you for those costs. And at this point in time, we don't have to get into the nitty gritty, but that is the idea that was surrounding that specific item. And then lastly, this is going to be not necessarily a theme, but we felt it was more of a bucket. So like, as you're going out to the community and you're saying, hey, this is the theme that we're looking at. What projects really get you excited and get you involved? I don't know that employee retention funding is really going to make the community go, yeah, that's what I really want to do. So we kept this as a separate bucket because it is a priority for council. It just doesn't quite fit into the revitalization, preservation, and celebration for the city. Next slide. So as we look toward phase 2, we just wanted to make sure we're aligning with our principles. We note that once we have this phase 1 complete, we can go into the community, we can start getting that engagement, asking people, you know, what they're excited to see, what they think could be improved. And then we want to look at that input and move forward with the city's 40th birthday in mind. So we have enough time at this point in time to really have some kind of a celebration, you know, bring people back together. It's the city's 40th birthday. We're, you know, rolling out of COVID. We're finally coming together again. We're bolstering our rec programs, you know, really getting the community involved. And then lastly, just a reminder that ARPA funds are one time only. We have 5.8 million. It's not going to be something that's reoccurring. So if we say, we want more jobs, more city employees, that's a repeating cost. So that's not necessarily appropriate for ARPA funding. So when you're looking at the different expenses that go with your capital projects, that is one thing a lot of council wanted to keep in mind. Yep, okay. So from here, I really wanted to start the discussion. We want to identify our structure. We want to look at how do you feel about community revitalization, preservation, and celebration as a theme? How do we feel about workforce recovery as a bucket? And do you want something changed here? Do you want something added? Is there a priority you think is missing or that doesn't align with your goals? And then once we have that set, we'll look at moving into phase 2 and identifying those specific projects and getting that community outreach and engagement. So with that, I'll open it up.
Councilmember Cavallari.
Thank you, Mayor. Laurel, I'll have a lot of questions in a moment. I guess this is for the city manager and public works director. Have we heard back? This will help me with my request. Have we heard back from the Silver Lake Water District regarding the sale of their property for a potential public works building?
It is available. We're going to go take a look at it and see how we could use it. It probably is treated as a raw hunk of land. It does not have the buildings we really desire. And so Matthew Combs and I are going to go up there this week and take a look at it. It is the only piece of land that seems to make sense other than what we already own within the city. But it's going to be a struggle. It's really not big enough. If you look at our requirement for both a lay down yard and a place for equipment, it's not big enough for that. Our dream would be to have a bigger place somehow. But yeah, we've taken some look at it. We've got about 2 months left of the time clock they gave us.
Thank you.
I should point out, it has not been appraised again. We've gone through 2 appraisals. We're not asking it to be appraised again yet. It will be different. Land values are higher, but it's also a lot smaller piece of land. So start the discussion to say, let's at least see if it would work for us.
So just, you've been around the block here for a while, Director Todd. So do you think it's, I mean, if we're going to commit funds, do you think it's a wise use of these ARPA funds, especially because it's one-time dollars? I mean, is how I'd put it.
Yeah, I think in terms of one-time funds, buying something that is one and done makes some sense versus, for instance, street sweeper. People keep saying street sweeper. Well, street sweeper requires a street sweeper person. So that would be a cost forever if you want to change the amount of street sweeping we do. So it's a different kind of animal. This might be a good way to use some funds to do it. We do need a public works yard somewhere, somehow. Someday when we develop ERCC, there's a lot of stuff that we're using that property for right now that's going to get displaced. You don't see that, but that's where all the dumpsters are for our street sweepings. That's where our salt and sand piles are. So there's probably an acre up there being used for those kinds of purposes. That doesn't include what you see out here.
Thank you.
Well, if no one else is, I'll chime in. I'm all for the employee retention bucket. To me, that's a no-brainer. The one word that you left out of the community revitalization, preservation, and celebration is beautification. You've heard me talk about our gateways, our signage, the median coming down. And that frankly got me thinking lately, you know, that as a developer, when you look at it, we have a roadway buffer requirement along our arterials and high state highways, which is great in principle. But if you looked at them, I mean, the comment I thought about the other day is, John, would you give the city of Mill Creek a Great Garden Award right now? No. And so that's what got me thinking, tying it into the celebration. I mean, the city will turn 40 on September 30th next year. God willing, I'll turn 57 on September 30th next year. The incorporation was actually approved on August 30th. So the idea behind this bucket was, let's bring the community together in 2023 and celebrate the city. And leading up to that, let's invest in the city to beautify it, to revitalize it, and then let's preserve it. That encompasses a lot of different ideas I heard from staff and heard that you guys had submitted. It's the investment in the grinders to keep the sidewalks up. It's the investment in a new street sweeper so we can do a better job keeping the streets clean. It's a public works facility so we can not just put lipstick on the pig and look nice next year. We can keep the city looking nice long-term. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to invest in our city. Most of you have all had kids. You have decent cars and they get covered in dog hair and they get covered in Cheerios, and our city needs to be detailed. And so I think this is a great opportunity to invest in the immediate short term as well as in the long term for our city. So I did not see the order that the lights came on, so I'm just going to go in order of pecking order. So Mayor Pro Tem and then Councilmember Steckler. And then
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I guess to me, all of these things that you brought up are some of our priorities. So I'm not sure, are you wanting us to just pick one for guidance that's most important tonight? So that's one of my questions. And then I do agree with the mayor regarding the overall theme for working on lots of different things, like the medians that need to be cleaned up, and the things that we need in order to make that happen so that the city looks crisper as a whole. And I think that will also attract more business to the city when it looks nice. That's also part of economic development, is looking sharp and keeping things crisp. So obviously we want to do I'm thinking off the top of my head, the workforce bucket is very important to all of us. But I guess my question really is, when it comes to all those other buckets, I feel like, or themes, I feel like they're important to a lot of us. So where do we, what do you need from us tonight? But before you answer that, I want to clarify something with Director Todd. It was my understanding that we need a new street sweeper to replace the one that keeps breaking down. So wouldn't that use the same sweeper person?
Two things going on there. We got two sweepers. They are getting very old. We have money in the equipment depreciation fund that we could apply to those. We've discussed about a different kind of sweeper potentially that would handle sticks and leaves, sticks and branches better than what we've got now. That's where we get slow, is because it's really made for sucking up little dust in a parking lot, not for sucking up big sticks. That's where some of the discussion comes in. But even if we had one person driving that sweeper all the time, that's going to be more time than we're applying to it now. Don't have that many hours applied. We used to have somebody who drove the sweeper almost 100% of the time. We don't have that anymore. So, and we're busy. So I'm just saying that new sweeper doesn't fix it alone.
Okay.
It would be a faster sweeper, but it's also probably more labor. So you just got to be careful. A lot of these things, same thing with the medians and the other. If we want to do that, you could spiff them up once, but those weeds will grow again. Those plants will grow again. That's our difficulty, unless we make a major investment to say, let's tear that out and pave it over. Let's tear it out and put in AstroTurf. Let's tear it out and arc it or something or other. So there's an investment in those that you could make, but there's also ongoing maintenance. I just want us to be careful to think about the ongoing aspect of it. We could spiff it up for the 40th birthday, but come 42, we could be looking the same way. So just be careful.
All right, thank you. And then, sorry, Laurel, now the other question.
Yes, so that is what we would consider the theme. So under this community revitalization, and we could do revitalization, preservation, and beautification, if you like that better than celebration, because that's where we were originally, but we didn't know how people felt on beautification. So under that, all of these different bullets can fall, the buckets fall under that. So your city program and service development, community enhancing capital projects, your business improvement grant program. So the majority of these items are falling under this community enhancing capital project bucket. And so from there, you can address all of the items we've discussed. And really, it's anything you can tie to that theme.
Council-
Thank you.
Councilmember Steckler.
I have a couple of thoughts that I wanted to address. And Laurel, you and I have had this discussion, so really I'll be more addressing my fellow council members on this. And I think that when I looked at the list that you had, I think we need to focus that down even more. And when I look at this money that we've been granted from the federal government, there's always a problem, human nature problem, when you come into a bucket of money. And one of the human nature problems is that there's always some things we need when we get a bunch of money. We could use it to spend on street sweepers and scrapers, and we could clean awnings, and we could do this with it, and we could do that with it. There's all kinds of things we need. What's really hard to do when you come in to a large sum of money is to invest it, because you don't get anything for it right away. It just goes away. And I think one of the things we fail to do is we don't necessarily invest in the future of our city. And one of the challenges that we have, and I think we need to think about, is the cost of running our city is going to continue to go up. We've seen it this year, huge cost increases, not just the fire, but other things as well. And that's going to continue to grow, because I think what you really need is not another street sweeper, but another person to drive the dang sweepers we got now. You need more people to get on the staff here. We're going to have more increased costs here in the city. And a big driver there is people costs, staffing costs. And the city is going to come back to us and want more costs. I think what we need to do with this money is invest in the city and come up with, and I'm a little bit more clearly define them as income related investments for our city. A lot of cities produce services that generate revenue streams for their cities. And when you get a $5.8 million grant that you could use to really generate some specific revenue streams for your city that could produce an additional $2 or $3 million a year in revenue, that's something that could help fund our structure here into the future. And there's a lot of these that I have seen in other cities that I've visited around the country, other cities that I've visited around the country that are really incredible what they build and what they get for them by charging these services out to the citizens and to businesses and other sources. I think what we should be looking at is investing this money for future revenue generation for our city, so that we don't have to look at some significant tax increases down the road instead. But everything that when I see all these other items, I think these are the cost of running our city. And I think that rather than using ARPA funds to kind of get us started, they're one-time money. It's going to go away. The next time you get there, these costs are going to come back to us a year from now, and we're not going to have any way to pay for them. So I think we need to find a way to cover these costs as a cost of doing business, a cost of running the city. So let's look at additional staff. Let's look at additional equipment if we need the equipment. These are the costs of doing our business. They shouldn't become a cost of the ARPA funds. A case in point is the workforce investment. To invest, if we need to, we're going to do a study on the costs of the salary costs and find that we need to look at some increased salaries and some readjustments across the board. We need to make those adjustments, and that needs to come out of the cost of our salaries for the staff here at the city. That's an ongoing investment. If we want to look at a retention bonus, I don't think that should come from a federal grant, that we use the federal grant monies to give our city employees a retention bonus. That should come from our city coffers. I don't think it should come from a federal grant money. That kind of leaves open a question of, well, should we be giving retention bonuses to other individuals in the city, other citizens that need a retention bonus as well, because they hung in here through the pandemic. So I think it kind of opens up a little, I'm concerned about using federal funds for the staff. I do support it for the services, the public services that put themselves at risk, like police and fire and so on, that's specifically called out for in ARPA for that particular segment. But I do think that a good part of this money, if it could be used and invested now for the economic well-being of Mill Creek, could come back and pay us dividends year after year after year down the road. And we find a way to pay for the cost of street sweepers and other elements in our budget. Thank you.
Councilmember Duque and then the acting city manager.
So I had two things that I wanted to point out. And the first, I don't know how this keeps happening, but I actually was going to say, I'm a really big fan of supporting the not flashy tasks that our city needs to handle. So I will have to talk to Councilmember Steckler about where we are, because it seems like I'm again on the other side there. For me, it feels like that's what makes sense. But I see what you're saying about staff and I would love to continue that conversation with you about that. But I specifically also lit up my light because I wanted to talk about the term beautification. Another term that was in previous emails or things that were shared was rejuvenation. And I just wanted to share my personal feelings that I don't really like the term beautification or rejuvenation when it comes to this type of funding. It feels very much first world problems to me in terms of what this funding is trying to address. That was my note to Laurel. So it seems like I might be the reason why beautification got removed from the initial conversations. For me, it felt very much out of touch for where the funding is coming from. And I specifically said, I think sidewalks fit into community safety and community revitalization. And in terms of, Mayor Holtzclaw was talking about, the aspect of beautification, all of that I was in agreement with. That still fit into the buckets that I had. I just cautioned specifically that I think community revitalization and preservation felt really authentic to what we're trying to do, because there's the revitalization part. Preservation seems to be really important for the type of talking points that residents have. When I was doorbelling last year, a lot of things, they talked about was making sure that everything looked crisp. Everything was well maintained. That was a huge priority. So I thought keeping it nice and simple with those two things aligned well. But, whatever the majority of the board feels, I'm comfortable in supporting, because I do acknowledge and agree that I like those buckets that were talked about under beautification to be part of it. But I just wanted to share, I'm the reason why that was removed. And there may have been someone else, but specifically, I know I was just looking up my email to Laurel. I said, oh, thank you.
Acting city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just a few comments. We do have, regarding the street sweepers, we do have 2 existing right now. We did have one breakdown, if I'm not mistaken, last year for a certain point of time. These do have a useful life and they're pretty much at the end, which is one reason why we did bring that up as one of those bucket items. The second is to kind of move things along a little bit. We, as you know, we have one theme. We have a bunch of buckets. As you give us ideas, we'll continue letting you know kind of these thoughts that you have fall under this theme, which a lot of them do actually. And then if there's something else that falls outside, then we'll just guide you towards another bucket as well. And it might be a good idea to bring up that list too, that shows all the buckets. So if you have more ideas or you want to be reminded of the other items that might fall under what your preferences are. Just a thought on Councilmember Steckler's thought about investment. The city of Mill Creek currently has a lot of things that are coming, the useful life is coming to an end on a lot of things. I believe when we put money into our infrastructure internally in our operations, we are investing in our city as well. So I understand the revenue generation, that's pretty clear. I just wanted to make sure that, we are investing in the city as well. Things do need to be replaced. Whether it's short-term labor, part-time consultants, street sweepers that are at their end of their useful life. We did have one example, of course, the excavator that we recently purchased. By doing that job in-house by our public works supervisor, we did save money on that, and something that we would have outsourced probably $4,000 or $5,000 worth. So there are ways that we are investing internally. So it was my point. Thank you.
Councilmember Cavallari.
Thank you, Mayor. Before I give my other comments, can I, just another question for the staff. Have we ever, I know we talked about doing a wetland study for that other piece next adjacent to Cougar Park. Has that been done or is that still in the works?
We did that study. I believe.
We have not done a new study. I don't, as Margaret Clancy talked to us, wetlands typically don't get smaller. And so there's very little extra land there. There's a sense that there's extra land there. There's very, very little developable spot.
We heard last week the buffers get small.
Well, you guys just made the buffer smaller, yeah, and bigger, so.
All right, thank you. If we start to just maybe, I think maybe a good way to kind of pan this out a little bit is if we kind of did the math, we have 5.8 million on the screen. What would a block of land next to a water tower cost us to put a public works facility and then perhaps build on it? What are we looking at for costs? I mean, because as long as I've been a council member up here, there's one thing that's always come up to the dais is that we have no place to put these trucks. We have no place to put the salt. And as we're getting ready to start building or doing something on DRCC, as the director Todd said, is that we're going to displace all that stuff and it's going to have to go somewhere. And we know during the winter, even during the summer, the row of trailered vehicles that are out here and it looks terrible, it looks awful. So to the mayor's points about beautifying our city and meeting a need, which has been dire for quite some time, I think is really a proper use of these funds. And to have the money kind of fall out of the sky is really a blessing from the Fed that we don't have to impact our other monies or other budgets to accomplish this. So I'm gonna, if I have to put my wish list aside, everything aside, and I've got a couple things I'd love to do here, I will forego all of that if we can start talking about two things. And it's just public works facility, getting that land purchased and building on it, and the employee recognition plan where we start to give back to the folks that have given so much to us. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm listening to the discussion and I just wanted to bring us back and remember, 'cause I want to make sure everyone that's listening in the public does have a realistic understanding that the whole purpose of the ARPA funds was to make sure that they were filling the gaps of revenue that we lost. So from my perspective, the whole purpose of the ARPA funds is to take care of paying for the things that we would have paid for had that money came in. So I just want to make sure that as we're having this discussion, that we do keep that in mind and it doesn't get misconstrued as being a misuse of funds, because that was the whole purpose of the ARPA funds. And that's what I use for my guiding principles when I'm debating on how to spend the money, that this is supposed to be taking care of things that we were supposed to paid for had COVID not happened and our revenues had came in the way they were supposed to. So I just want to make sure everybody remembers that and that we're all on that page. And I think that Director Brock is doing a really good job of keeping us in that space. So thank you.
I'm going to throw,
But in fairness, sorry, Brian, there's other uses for the money. It's not just one size fits all. Oh, all right.
and one other caution, we may have some tough discussions coming up. I agree in principle, we need to identify revenue generating sources. But as we've sometimes talked about, we need to be realistic. We don't have a $2 to $3 million revenue stream. Passport is not and will never be a $2 to $3 million revenue stream. And we need to also understand the difference between gross revenues and net profit to the city's bottom line, because we're not generating $400,000 of net profit to the city's bottom line. We have to look at the cost and see what the net benefit is that we have left over that we can put towards any of these items. And so we need to keep that in mind as we look at these revenue generating sources as well. But
I think if we take a look at the pre-COVID revenue profits from Passport and from the daycare center, I think you'd be surprised at how much we generated from both of those.
I've asked for those numbers because I'm not sure I will be the one who'll be surprised, but let's let the
Yeah,
numbers say what they say.
What I was told, they were, have you looked on those?
The last few years that I was looking at, it was closer to 200,000.
Yeah, but
But pre
pre-COVID.
that, I do believe it was close to 400. I will say, I don't know that staff had grabbed all of the salaries. I know they didn't include the recreation mainly because the recreation usually had between 100 and 200,000 that was transferred over because recreation is not typically something that brings in income. It's
No,
usually more expensive.
Yeah, not rec. I was thinking just the daycare center and the Passport services.
I will have to look into
Just
the
those two.
daycare specifically,
Just those
just
two.
because they didn't separate a lot of the staff. And so I'm gonna need staff to dig into that.
Okay, we were presented with that data, so I know it should be available. I remember a prior finance director did share it with us. That's where I got the numbers. So
Okay.
I think the potential is there, and there are other projects that we haven't done. Other potential and you know in response to Mayor Pro Tem, the monies are. We've taken the 5.8 million as a loss against revenues to the city, which now have gone into our coffers to be used at our discretion. And part of that discretion could be to use it as a revenue producing stream, and it would be in compliance with the use of the ARPA funds. That would be in compliance with, from my understanding.
If we ended up using general fund expenses, if we offset regular general fund expenses, we could then relieve the timeline and we could use that money. But if you look at what ARPA is specifically for, that is not what it was for. But they have given us the umbrella of the $10 million revenue loss for all cities. Obviously, we're not getting 10 million,
No.
but that just means that our 5.8 can be considered revenue loss. And it then can be
Then we
applied to our
can use
general
it
fund.
to generate revenue producing
Yes. I-
against the expense of revenue producing funds, correct?
Yeah, eventually we could end up doing that.
Yes,
Yes.
so we're not out of compliance on that.
I will know, I don't foresee us getting another 400,000, even if passports are currently, if we bulked everything up, I don't see us hitting, $1 million.
And the other thing is, I'm in total agreement with all investments of new equipment, with salaries, anything to do with the employees. I'm just saying that rather than using ARPA funds, let's use our general fund to do that. And I support that. I just didn't want to use ARPA funds for that. So I want to make sure the record's clear. Councilman Steckler is supportive of investments for equipment for staff.
And I do want to note that all of the different revenue producing streams can be reviewed under the city program and service development. So we're not saying that's not a priority, and we can dig into that if we have that as a common priority.
Councilmember Allison?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. I don't think the city ever had a daycare program. They had a preschool program. So, big difference there. Huge difference. I liked what Mayor Pro Tem said about, the intent of the funds, because that's really where my mind settles on what we should be doing with the funds. Not that it can't be applied to more revenue generating, but how can we make sure the city is as healthy as it possibly can be with those funds? Is kind of where I start. I realize we have that big piece of property. We have to figure out what to do with it, but there needs to be a balance. So, if we need to invest in some equipment, reward the staff that stuck with the city this whole time, it just seems like there's a balance there. It's not one or the other.
Anything else you need from us tonight?
I think the main thing we need is just an overall consensus on how you feel about the theme and the one bucket. And we can change the theme if you want to stick with community revitalization, preservation, and celebration, or if you want community revitalization, preservation, and beautification. It's mainly just how you guys feel about this overall theme and the bucket so that we can either move to phase 2 or not and come back to the drawing board with something else.
I like the buckets. I think one thing that might be helpful is on a couple of them, we may be able to put some dollar figures, like on the employee retention and on the public works. And I think that might help then form the discussion for the remaining buckets and what may or may not go into them. So would that be a good next step?
I agree.
So we do want to move to phase 2 with these to get numbers.
I think so. Okay, thank you, Laura. Good discussion. Community events update. Jody.
Hello, thanks for giving me the time to do this. We've been busy this summer already, at the beginning of summer already. Isa, you can go ahead and move it to the next slide. There we go. But we just wanted to update you on, do a combined events calendar for you so that you had everything to look forward to in one spot. We did become sponsors of the summer concert series at the Forum in Mill Creek Town Center. We're excited about that. So we wanted to give you a rundown of all the bands that were going to be there Wednesday nights from 6 to 8. And the 2 that are highlighted in green and that you see photos of here are the dates that the city will actually have an employee night at the Forum. So we're excited for that opportunity to share some time with anyone who wants to come out and enjoy the time with the employees in the city. And then one of the other opportunities that we have as part of being a sponsor is that we can actually have a banner up in the Forum. So we'll be having a city banner there. And we will also have the opportunity to either speak if we want to, or have a table at those events. And so we're kind of looking at the idea of having some using a table at those events to have a chance for either maybe the mayor and mayor pro tem to do a city chat there at some point and talk with and different folks that are there. It's just a great opportunity to really meet with the community because everybody's so excited about this concert series. So more to come on that. And so invitations will be going out for the employee events, but just wanted you to have all those dates on your calendar to go out and celebrate. You can move on, thanks. The next thing coming up real fast is Pianos on Main. So we'll have 3 pianos being delivered to their locations on one at the Main Street Bridge, one at Pier 1 Imports, and one at Town and Country Markets, which we just got solidified today. So they'll be out beginning next Monday, and through September 5th. So we encourage you to go out. If you do happen to go out and take your family there and enjoy it and take photos, we would love to have you share those with us. That's one thing that, looking back through the past couple of years that they did have it, we had very few photos. So we would love to have you do that. And more information, will be coming on that. You should start seeing posts on social by the end of the week this week. And we're excited. We have one piano that we haven't seen yet, so we're excited to see the artwork on that one. Next slide. We are talking about different ways to do city chat. So possibly not just Zoom, but in person and doing some sort of a roadshow. So we'll be talking more with Mayor Pro Tem about the possibilities for upcoming kind of in-person events and ways to possibly take the mayor and Mayor Pro Tem to a specific spot where people are already congregating and then have them answer questions. So more to come on that, but we are looking at how we can get more community engagement using that platform. Mill Creek Festival coming very soon. The city again will have 3 booths there. So the Mill Creek, City of Mill Creek, the McYabs, and Mill Creek Police Department will all have a booth. We're excited about all the things that we'll be sharing, similar to last year, but also doing some things that are different. So more to come on that. You'll see everybody out there. Hopefully you'll be in attendance. There will be a VIP event. Sorry about that. There will be a VIP event that Friday night. So invitations will be going out soon to give council more information on that. Next slide. The Run of the Mill, Saturday, July 23rd. They wanted us to give a little bit more information or get a little bit more information out. So we have been sharing some of their information on social. And so if you know anybody that would be interested in this, feel free to share, take a screenshot or share this information with them on how they can register. Our party in the parks, if you had a chance to go, Councilmember Duque and Mayor Pro Tem Vignal were there, Director Todd. It was such an amazing night. Honestly, we had such a good time. So this was just last Thursday, June 30th. Incidentally, my 1-year anniversary with the city was that day. So I thought it was just an amazing celebration for my 1 year. Just for me. It was very well attended. It was all that Scott and I could have hoped for. Honestly, we were just thrilled with the outcome. The kids were all excited to get their Party in the Parks backpacks. We had a long line for balloon artists, the food truck, Wise Guy food truck, and the Yay ice cream. Were thrilled with the outcome. They both pretty much sold out that night. So that was great. We were really happy with that. And you'll see photos. We did post photos on Facebook. We have more to come. Scott has a whole bunch that he took that he'll be putting out. We're starting a city Flickr account so that we can give you and the media access to all the photos that we take. So it's not so difficult for you to see all of that. The next one is at Heron Park on July 28th. And then, of course, Mill Creek Sports Park for a big bash at the end of the summer on August 25th. So please put those on your calendars. National Night Out is coming up August 2nd. They are working hard, and I think we'll have social information out on social by the end of the week this week with more information on that. So keep an eye out for that. Next slide. Thank you. Heidi with Mill Creek Town Center Association asked if I would remind everyone that there will be another wine walk August 27th. I'm sure you don't need any reminders because those are very popular, but so we put that in there. And I think that might be it. Yeah. So if you have any questions, any additional thoughts on what we can do at any of the Party in the Parks or any of these events, we're always open to that. But we are real appreciative of your support when you come out and talking about it, sharing about our events on social. We really appreciate that. And also I wanted to say a huge thank you to our McYabs for Party in the Park. They were phenomenal. They did a phenomenal job. They were so helpful. And also Director Todd and the Public Works Department for Party in the Parks. Huge thank you. Director Todd even taught me a new way to put away a tent. And if you've ever had to put up and put down those tents, they're kind of a pain. And so now I feel I have learned a lot. So thank you. Is there any questions?
Congratulations on your 1 year.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Mayor. I was going to say that save this for my report later, but since we were talking about the events now, I do want to just say thank you to especially Scott and Jody and all the staff that put on the Party in the Parks. It was such a great event. You know, Cora was so excited and had so much fun. And I feel like all the kids were were so excited and having so much fun and so ready to get out into the community and be there with each other again. And it was just such a great event, and you all worked so hard for that. That's a lot of work to make something like that come together and run, and you all put the extra time in and stay late and have to take it down. And so I just want to thank all of you for all that hard work. And it was such a great community building event. And I agree with you, Jody. I couldn't have asked for it to have been better. It was just such a fun time. And I'm looking forward to the next one. And then I also wanted to say that Cora was asking about the pianos the other day. So she is going to be so excited that the pianos are when the pianos come in. And I do take pictures every year, but I don't think I've ever sent them to the city of her playing on the piano. So I'll make sure I take a picture of her at the pianos and send them over to you all.
Thank you. We would love that.
Welcome.
Councilmember Duque.
Yes, ditto to everything Stephanie said. I think I told Tony in person when I saw her, what a fantastic job they did, and just how incredibly lucky we are to be able to have these type of community events that feel just such a community building, having kids run around and play, it's just absolutely beautiful. It's everything I love about Mill Creek was that evening. So it's pretty spectacular. I was also really impressed to see 2 members of the Parks and Recreation Board attend and help tennis. Goliaski and Jeff Towen were both there working the booth and answering. They had questions about the different parks, about which park has a bad a bocce ball court. It was exactly it was great, and I really should volunteer and help at the event and not chase my kids. So I will make an effort to do that next time. Then I have a question. I'm really excited to see so many of these events during the summer, the city, what we're able to provide, and then also with the partnerships, that are happening in the town center. I'm curious, have there been any conversations with the Vintage in terms of that area out there? I mean, I know it's slowly, the farm, sorry. Yeah. The Vintage meaning I mixed it up this time. But have there been any conversations? Are they doing anything? I know that they have a couple of businesses now open. So were they hoping to do anything? Or it's a different structure since it's one owner of all of that versus the way it is a town center, but I'll pause there. Have you heard anything?
I have not heard anything.
The acting city manager and I have a meeting on Thursday with people from the farm, so we can make sure Martin to make a note to ask him that question.
Yeah, we'll make a note to ask that question. We have reached out to Jennifer Vangerpin already earlier regarding the sanctuary, as Councilmember Steckler asked about what's going to happen there about the opening and all the other businesses as well. So we're still waiting on an answer for that, but we'll ask her again when we talk with her this week. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody.
Thank you.
Realize looking at the agenda, somehow we dropped the reports from the
Yeah, sorry,
council
Mayor.
and the
Yeah,
acting city
we can
manager. So let's go up and down the row, and then we'll turn it over to Martin for any reports he has. I just had 3 things. First, you're going to be in the Mayor Pro Tem's capable hands next week, as I'll be celebrating my anniversary in Canada. Second, I have asked the city manager to bring to us, well, we've talked about this off and on for some time. When we have meetings the 1st, 2nd, and 4th, those back-to-back meetings are a strain on staff. They have to turn around a meeting and an agenda and substance in 48 to 72 hours. So I've asked him to give some thought and confer with the directors, and so we can have a discussion. Is there a better way to more efficiently use our time and the staff's time? I don't know if that means 2 regular business meetings and using 1 meeting as a study session. If it means meeting on something other than the 1st, 2nd, and 4th, maybe it's 3 consecutive weeks, but at least have asked them to bring us some information and thoughts so we can have a discussion. And then the last item is, I've mentioned before, I'd like to institutionalize the annual retreat, or the retreat we did in March as an annual retreat. And rather than, as was the case this year, trying to shoehorn the retreat into our schedule, I'd like us to plan around the retreat. So my thought was that we aim to have it every year, the end of January or beginning of February. And so my question was, would there I guess, two questions. Did everyone like the format of doing it over 2 nights like we did it this year? And if so, would people be willing to meet an extra week in either January or February next year? If everyone's amenable to that, then we'll work with the acting city manager so we can have that in the schedule and plan ahead so that we're not trying to find dates that everyone works with everyone's schedule. So great, we will proceed accordingly. Mayor Pro Tem, anything additional?
Thank you, Mayor. I was just gonna let staff know, I'm sorry, my camera just died. So, but we're at the end, so don't worry about it. That's why it's off. And on that, I have no report. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Steckler.
Just an interesting thing to share. As most of you know, I'm also a member of the Mill Creek Kiwanis Club, and we talked about the sanctuary. The Kiwanis Club donated 2 benches to the Kiwanis Club a few weeks ago. We installed them. And 1 week after we installed them, one of the benches was ransacked with graffiti. And I've heard the city report on some of the graffiti issues that they had at the sports park and such. And so I went off to the local hardware store to get some graffiti remover, and I asked if they had any, and they said sure. And they took me back to this huge empty spot on their walls, and I got the second to last container of graffiti removal. And I said, "Gee, sure, we're kind of out of stock on this stuff." And she says, "Oh, the parks just clean us out as soon as we get it in. The parks departments come in and just take it all." Parks, P-A-R-K-S, and yeah, parks. And not just Mill Creek, it's parks departments from all over. The graffiti vandalism is rampant. And because, I hear about Mill Creek a lot, but I don't realize how it is everywhere else. And so, as we have the media on these calls and checking in, and whatever we can do, maybe even Mill Creek, our marketing team could do this as well, but whatever we can do to get the watchdogs out there, keeping your eyes open in the parks, in the areas around the cities. If you're seeing anybody with a can of spray paint doing graffiti, don't approach them. But if you could whip out your cell phone and just get a picture of them or something, anything to help stop or slow down the vandalism. It is rampant, really rampant around the North End. I just was shocked at how much they go through this graffiti removal product, but I was shocked by it. And I just wanted to share that.
Councilmember Cavallari, any report?
Thank you, Mayor. Just real quick. I guess to Councilmember Steckler's point just now and to the presentation by Jody, I was down in Seattle today and I drove past 2 of their parks. And if I could see past the people sleeping on the benches and the addicts shooting up on the pathways, I realized how blessed we are here in Mill Creek and to never stop paying attention to small details. Thank you.
Councilmember Allison.
No reports per se, but just a huge thank you to the staff. I know that the party in the parks and just having events again, it's a huge benefit to everybody that lives in the city, and it's only possible because you work so hard at it. Yeah, I guess that's all I would like to say. Thanks.
Councilmember Duque.
Yes, I actually just today put in a report through the Citizen Support Center on the website for graffiti that was done on 132nd and Bothell Everett Highway on our City of Mill Creek signage. And then along 132nd. So I absolutely agree with Councilmember Steckler that there seems to be so much more. And it's something I've talked to with staff. And I actually have an email written up for Martin about this. So it was just really interesting how that came up. But I just wanted to repeat that if anyone sees anything, to go to the website, Citizen Support Center. And there's a request place where you said specifically graffiti. Don't forget to request it. It's from my understanding, it's very helpful to the Public Works Department because it provides a ticket. And so that they can, when they have the time and the resources, that they can go ahead and handle that. I also just really briefly wanted to address the tragedy that happened yesterday in Chicago, northern Chicago and Highland at the 4th of July parade. I'm going to keep it short and sweet because I get really emotional. I happened to be at the Bothell parade yesterday, and there was a moment with my kids that we looked up. We were right on the corner near Amaro's, and I saw that they had a rooftop, and I went, "Oh, there's a rooftop. Look at all those people with nice views." Never imagining that in a couple hours I would see there
And so the parking in the parks and these type of events, it's so important to what makes our cities special. And I just want to acknowledge that it's sometimes really scary to be able to go and provide these events because you never know. And I just wanted to just acknowledge that horrible tragedy happened on our Independence Day. That's one of my favorite holidays, and I'll leave it there. But I hope everyone has taken some time to just hug their loved ones and take a moment to read the stories about all of the victims and all of the first responders and everyone around who had to see what happened. Thank you.
Acting City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a few updates. Going forward on a quarterly basis, I'll be updating council on by beginning of each quarter. I'll update on the prior quarter's accomplishments and then kind of what's going forward in the next quarter. I'll do that going forward starting in July. I'm sorry. Probably do it. Yeah, I'll do it probably a little next week. So what we've done in the past, because I wasn't ready today. I'll do it next week and give an update on that. Then every quarter going forward. Coming up in July, we have another all-employee meeting coming up towards the end of this month. We'll hold that. I think it's the last week. A few short-term items that we're working on right now is looking for deputy city manager. So we'll be looking at the job descriptions, comparing those to the city manager job descriptions. Mayor had asked for me to put together kind of an outline of kind of what I'm going to be looking to be doing going forward. It's aligned with that job description, kind of what my priorities are. I'll put together a summary for all of you, which will also include what the deputy city manager, what I'm foreseeing that position would entail as well. Police chief position is up after the deputy city manager. We'll get that going as well sometime after that. That's a priority, as well as our guild president mentioned in our last council meeting. So we'll be working on that. And just an overall strategy. I'm going to put together something that will outline kind of what my goals are going forward overall. Councilmember Steckler gave me a good suggestion about putting that together, so I'll do that to council. I have a really good idea where we're going, what we need to do, and I'll bring that all in one document, a format that is pretty easy to understand, so everybody knows where I'm going. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. And that's it for staff reports.
That's all for staff.
Okay. That brings us, before we go into executive session, for audience communication. Anyone would like to address the council? Will is on the ball tonight, fast. Beating Barb to the punch. Will, name and address in 3 minutes, please.
Yeah, Will Nelson, 14925 29th Drive Southeast. What I'm going to mention is that I would hope anybody who knows the character I'm going to talk about might either let me know his name or talk to the guy to cease and desist with his activity that I observed yesterday. I think it goes to the well-being of the community. Yesterday, I went out about 3:30 on 148th, and at the intersection of 148th and Village Green Drive, here's a guy on a motorcycle doing wheelies around and around. And it was an unusual motorcycle. It had narrow diameter tires, but very thick, and had a red tank. And it was a Caucasian guy with a beard, a younger guy, of course. And I don't give these guys much leeway. And so, seeing that I had a free turn and I was in my lane of travel, I made a right turn onto Village Green Drive. This caused this gentleman, if I can call him that, and I shouldn't, to drop down and cease his activity. He was blocking a lot of traffic. And as he dropped down, he's going parallel to me, northbound in the southbound lane on Village Green Drive, and keeping an eye on me, trying to figure out what I was going to do. I was going very slow so as not to run into the guy. And so he speds up, and then he does a U-turn in front of me and pulls over to the curb. Very amazing, very interesting. I don't know the guy. I've seen the bike once before. But if anybody knows who he is or knows of him, might want to talk to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Anyone else? I didn't see if Barb had her hand up. Anyone else like to address the council? I'm gonna just. No, not seeing any other hands. Okay, with that, the council is going to go into executive session for the discussion of performance of a public employee per RCW 42.30.110 subsection 1G, and the discussion of the status of collective bargaining negotiations per RCW 42.30.140 subsection 4. Action will not be taken on either matter at the end of the executive session. We're going to need probably a half hour. So why don't we just go ahead and extend the regular meeting to 9 o'clock so we don't have to come in a few more minutes. So can we have a motion to extend till 9?
Motion to extend the meeting to 9 o'clock.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the meeting is extended till 7 o'clock and we will be in executive session until 8:35. God, I've set the bar high.
Gosh, there's a huge spread back here. I'll be darned. I like. Can all split a soda.
We're visible out there in chambers, so.
It was nice and cool in here, though.
I'm gonna go fill up my water.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sure.
No, you're right. Thank you. Yeah, and they put us in the, yeah, because they put us in a breakout room now, so we should be okay now. Yeah, we didn't-
Okay, the council has concluded its executive session at 8:35, and if there's no objection, I will adjourn the meeting and see you in 3 weeks. Good meeting next week in my absence.